The Open University of Hong Kong hosted the International Conference on ICT and Teaching and Learning from July 6th to 8th, 2009. This year, the focus was on blended learning, blended technologies and teaching practices. In this presentation, Dr. Jan Harrington of Murdoch University in Western Australia describes her research into authentic learning tasks within the blended learning model.
Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I don't know if you're like me, but whenever I do anything with technology or try anything and it works, it's just like magic. You know, it has that effect on you. You just say, wow, this is so wonderful, it's so great. And I think that I put the picture of the plane there because I do a lot of travel on planes, and every time I think it's magic that I'm up above these clouds. So I think that's a really nice thing to say. And John Sculley, who was the chief executive of Apple Computer at that time, made this comment which also brought up this idea about magic. Teachers and students will command a rich learning environment, and he's speaking about multimedia here, that had you described it to me when I was at school would have seemed entirely magical. Imagine a screen that can display in vivid colour the inner workings of a cell, the births and deaths of stars, the clashes of armies, and the triumphs of art. And then imagine that you have access to this, all of this and more, by exerting little more effort than simply asking for it to appear. It seems like magic even today. But I have to say that view of learning and technology is one that reflects a view of learning from computers. And really, I think that research is telling us now that these information-based approaches, where information is provided in a kind of a one-way stream from computers to students, that these really do not result in sustained and deep learning. It's more just another source of information. And in fact, research really is telling us that we're moving much more away from that kind of instructivist point of view, where the computer teaches, to a more constructivist one, away from transmission of knowledge towards a more active construction of knowledge, and away from this step-by-step where everything is set out in a very logical way to one where the students themselves explore the learning environment. Away from individual work to collaborative work, and as we mentioned, away from learning from technology to one learning with technology. And in my talk, I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about technology as cognitive tools rather than something that we learn from. And also moving away from a decontextualised type of approach to a much more authentic approach. And we can use pedagogical models like authentic learning to guide the creation of successful blended learning environments. A lot of my research has been in authentic learning, and I'd like to just spend a little bit of time now saying, well, what is it and what is it not? Because it can be a little bit confusing. When you use the word authentic, people sometimes assume that it needs to be real. And what we would say is it doesn't really need to be real. It needs to be cognitively real if you're using it as a pedagogy. So in my research that I've done with my colleagues, we've come up with 9 elements of authentic learning, because people say, well, what do you mean by authentic? This is a way to really define it in terms of pedagogy. So I'll just go through these characteristics now with a bit of an example. Authentic context is the first one. So in any learning environment, it would be a physical or virtual environment that reflects the way the knowledge will be used in real life. And I think you probably would recognise this kind of thing where you have a website or a multimedia learning environment where students can go in and explore a metaphor. So it's meant to provide a purpose and motivation for learning, because it has a realistic a sense of realism to it. And the explores can be really, ideas can really be explored at length in the context of very real or realistic situations. So the second characteristic of authentic learning is the task. Tasks and activities that have real-world relevance. The third characteristic is expert performance, or access to expert thinking and the modelling of processes. And the expert doesn't necessarily have to be a world-renowned expert. An expert in this sense could be somebody who's just learned about the particular thing that you're wanting your students to know just a few weeks before, but they're more knowledgeable than the person who's learning. So it's also very much about opportunities for sharing narratives and stories. The fourth one is multiple perspectives, where students examine something not from a single perspective, which might be the teacher's point of view, or it might be a textbook, but instead they look at it from multiple points of view. And I think I need say very little about this. In the age of the internet, it's so easy for us to get multiple perspectives on things. You know, the powerful search engines that are there really provide that very readily. And the next one is collaboration, which is joint problem solving and social support, where you would have students working not solely as individuals as they complete their tasks, but they collaborate. And so you would, and the examples I've given there are some technologies like, for instance, wikis are a wonderful way that you can have collaboration online where people are not actually physically in the same area. The next one is articulation. In fact, articulation gives students a chance to give a public presentation of their argument and to really defend their position. And you can do this with presentations to class, and there's many ways using technology that you can do this, and in a blended situation where you have a face-to-face component, it is very easy to do. And the next one is reflection, and this is thinking about reflecting and discussing choices. And it's interesting, sometimes we think about reflection as being a solitary, quiet thing, but there's a couple of ways to think about reflection, that it's a social process as well as a very quiet sort of personal thing. And there's reflection in action and reflection on action. So the reflection in action is where you have to make choices and decisions about what you're going to do as you complete a task. And then reflection on action later is, later on you think about how you've learnt something, reflect upon it, what was good about it, what was bad, and so forth. And the examples I've given there are reflections on action, where you can write up a journal about your learning journey. And the next characteristic is one that principally involves the teacher, but not solely, scaffolding and coaching, where support's provided to the learner by teachers and by others in the learning environment. And the scaffolding is the teacher's role becomes less of a didactic kind of role and more of a supporting role, although there is still a role for both within this. But also, if you have collaboration going, scaffolding can also be provided by more able partners who can assist students. And the example I've got there is one we often use, and I'm sure you would too, where you use something like as simple as track changes in Microsoft Word, for example, where you would comment on a student's writing, and you can do it right there and then and email it back to them. You know, it's a wonderful use of technology for very specific scaffolding.